Jacksonville, Florida, 2016. The respected Pastor Xavier Matthews is discovered dead in his study, surrounded by evidence that shatters his community's trust. As Detective Stella Mercer investigates, she uncovers the tangled relationships between Xavier, his 18-year-old babysitter Elliot, and the church's new worship leader, revealing how quickly devotion can transform into deadly obsession when threatened with exposure. Pastor Xavier Matthews' voice fills Oakwood Community Church with practiced authority as he speaks of temptation and devotion. The congregation of 400 remains captivated, as they are every Sunday. At 41, Xavier stands tall and commanding, his salt and pepper hair and confident stance projecting the perfect image of spiritual leadership. His reputation extends beyond Jacksonville, drawing visitors from neighboring counties with his gift for making ancient scripture feel urgently relevant. In the front row, Rebecca Matthews endures another morning of increasing pain. At 38, the former celebrated choir director now struggles through each day, her once vibrant presence diminished by debilitating migraines that multiple doctors have failed to properly diagnose. She maintains the graceful poise expected of a pastor's wife through determination alone, her slender fingers occasionally pressing against her temple when she thinks no one is watching. The prescription bottle in her purse has become both salvation and curse. In the church nursery, 18-year-old Elliot Chambers watches the sermon on the closed-circuit television. The Matthews children color quietly nearby, accustomed to her supervision. Dark, intelligent eyes study Xavier's every movement with an intensity that goes beyond normal admiration. Class valedictorian, Harvard-bound in the fall, Elliot presents the perfect image of responsible youth. 3 months as the Matthews family babysitter has given her access few others enjoy. The calculation behind her attentive gaze remains her secret alone. In the sound booth, 24-year-old Zara Whitfield adjusts audio levels with focused precision. New to Jacksonville after leaving her music director position in Atlanta under circumstances she never discusses, Zara's extraordinary talent is wrapped in quiet confidence. Her first Sunday leading worship transformed the normally reserved congregation, her voice carrying emotional depth that left many in tears. Honey blonde waves frame a face that draws attention even in silence. She has already caught the interest of several single church members, and one who isn't. Detective Stella Mercer sits in the back row, slipping out during the closing hymn to avoid socializing. At 44, 15 years in law enforcement have given her watchful hazel eyes that miss nothing. Recently transferred to Jacksonville following a difficult divorce, she attends church sporadically. Today, the daughter of a disgraced pastor simply needed somewhere quiet to contemplate her latest case: pharmacy break-ins targeting specific prescription medications. As the congregation disperses into the Florida sunshine, a carefully choreographed dance unfolds. Rebecca Matthews stands beside her husband, sunglasses shielding sensitive eyes, her smile growing increasingly strained with each handshake and conversation. Elliot ensures her perfectly timed visibility as the Matthews children run to their parents. She offers to help Emma study for tomorrow's math test, suggesting she could come that evening if Rebecca needs rest. Rebecca begins to decline, but Xavier interrupts with concern about his wife's obvious discomfort. His protective hand rests on Rebecca's shoulder as he accepts Elliot's offer, explaining he has sermon preparation but the children would benefit from Elliot's help. The arrangement appears entirely innocent: a caring pastor, an ailing wife, a helpful babysitter. No observers notice the momentary touch as Xavier helps Elliot with her coat, fingers lingering against her wrist, or the charged glance exchanged between them. As Elliot mentions bringing her biology textbook for college prerequisite questions, Rebecca's smile tightens almost imperceptibly. The subtle tension dissipates when Zara emerges from the sound booth, equipment bags slung over her shoulder. Xavier compliments her worship arrangement with professional warmth that nonetheless makes Rebecca glance up sharply despite her pain. They exchange brief words about expanding the worship team, maintaining appropriate distance that somehow crackles with unidentifiable energy. Rebecca watches this exchange through dark sunglasses, her expression unreadable. By evening, the Matthews home settles into familiar routine. The stately Victorian parsonage sits 6 blocks from the church, its graceful exterior hiding the growing fractures within. Rebecca retreats upstairs with her prescription while Elliot supervises homework and evening activities. After the children begin watching a movie in the den, she moves through the kitchen with practiced familiarity, the perfect helper creating the perfect impression. Xavier emerges from his study doorway, commenting on Elliot's invaluable assistance, especially with Rebecca's worsening condition. Their conversation shifts from genuine concern about Rebecca's health to the weight of Xavier's responsibilities. The subtle repositioning brings them closer together, opportunity disguised as compassion. A glance toward the stairs, then back to Elliot, and Xavier mentions needing a second opinion on his youth sermon after the children are asleep. This is how boundaries begin to dissolve, with plausible reasons, with believable explanations that grow increasingly hollow. Midnight finds the children long asleep and the study atmosphere transformed from professional to intimate. Empty tea mugs sit abandoned on the desk, sermon notes forgotten. Xavier's chair has gradually shifted beside Elliot's rather than across the desk. He marvels at her exceptional insight, her spiritual maturity. Each compliment diminishes the distance between mentor and student. The space between them shrinks through seemingly accidental movements, reaching for the same Bible, leaning to examine a passage. When Xavier's hand finally covers hers, a boundary dissolves. The touch lingers without acknowledgement of its impropriety. His eventual withdrawal leaves an absence charged with unspoken possibility. Though Xavier mentions checking on Rebecca, Elliot's parting offer of availability for anything hangs in the air, subtle enough to deny, clear enough to understand. Driving home, Elliot's composed expression transforms into quiet triumph. Her carefully calculated approach has yielded results faster than anticipated. The shy, admiring glances have evolved into physical contact, just as she planned. The innocent babysitter facade conceals methodical intention developed over months of observation. Across town, Detective Mercer reviews pharmacy security footage showing a hooded figure selecting specific medication bottles. Something about the suspect's movements seems oddly familiar, though she can't identify why. Another break-in tonight follows the same pattern, targeted medications rather than money or controlled substances. The connection remains just beyond her grasp. Meanwhile, Xavier stands in his darkened hallway, caught between his sleeping wife's bedroom and his children's room. Momentary shame washes over him as he contemplates the line he's beginning to cross. The vibration of his phone interrupts this rare moment of conscience. Elliot's message expresses gratitude for being truly seen. Though the appropriate response would be silence, Xavier instead affirms their mutual connection, describing the clarity her perspective brings to his life. In the master bedroom, Rebecca lies awake despite medication, tears sliding silently down her temples. The headache persists alongside growing certainty that something is deeply wrong with her marriage, her health, perhaps her sanity. Her trembling fingers reach for the pill bottle, not noticing the subtle differences in the capsules from the previous month's prescription. 6 months from this night, one person under this roof will lie dead, 2 will carry lifelong trauma, and another will face arrest. But tonight, the perfect pastoral family image remains intact, cracking beneath the surface but not yet completely shattered. February brought unseasonable warmth to Jacksonville, matching the dangerous heat building between Pastor Xavier Matthews and his children's babysitter. What began as lingering glances and innocent touches evolved with alarming speed. Their Wednesday evening counseling sessions extended well past midnight, Xavier's study becoming the stage for increasingly intimate encounters. The locked door, the silenced phones, the carefully maintained plausible deniability, all part of an elaborate performance that fooled everyone except perhaps Rebecca, whose medication-clouded mind occasionally pierced through the fog with startling clarity. For Xavier, Elliot represented forbidden fascination. Youth, admiration, and availability wrapped in intelligent conversation and spiritual curiosity. The power imbalance intoxicated him. Her eager responses to his attention fed something long dormant, making him feel vibrant in ways his marriage and ministerial duties hadn't for years. For Elliot, Xavier represented opportunity, access to influence, security, and the financial stability her single-parent upbringing had never provided. Each interaction advanced her carefully constructed plan. The expensive watch she admired casually during Bible study appeared as a gift 2 weeks later. College application fees mysteriously paid. The reliable used car she needed for Harvard suddenly within reach when Xavier arranged a special scholarship through the church's discretionary fund. Their stolen moments multiplied. The church office after evening meetings. The parsonage study during Rebecca's medical appointments. Once, daringly, in the church sanctuary after midnight, where Elliot suggested the transgression carried spiritual significance, something Xavier, in his moral descent, embraced rather than rejected. Each encounter left him feeling simultaneously exhilarated and ashamed, the latter emotion increasingly drowned beneath justifications wrapped in spiritual language. God brought us together for a purpose, Xavier whispered against Elliot's neck one evening, his wedding band gleaming in the dim light of his office. This connection transcends conventional understanding. Elliot's agreement masked calculation. Her phone, hidden in her purse, recorded every word, every encounter, every promise. The voice notes accumulated alongside text messages and financial transactions, insurance against abandonment, leverage for future security. For Harvard-bound Elliot, passion was secondary to pragmatism. March brought transformation in the form of Zara Whitfield. Though she'd arrived in January, her integration into church leadership happened gradually. By mid-March, her expanded role meant regular planning meetings with Xavier, collaborative worship arrangements, and increasing visibility. Her extraordinary musical talent drew the congregation into deeper worship experiences, while her quiet confidence and natural beauty drew Xavier's wandering attention. The first leadership meeting in Xavier's office lasted 3 hours, their theological discussion electric with unacknowledged attraction. Zara's perspective on worship as authentic connection rather than performance resonated with Xavier's earliest ministerial aspirations, before ambition and image had taken precedence. Unlike his relationship with Elliot, conversation with Zara awakened not just desire but also conscience, a dangerous combination for a man living a compartmentalized life. The following Sunday, Rebecca observed from the front pew as Xavier's sermon incorporated Zara's worship philosophy almost verbatim. Despite prescription-dulled senses, she noticed his gaze repeatedly finding the worship leader, lingering with an intensity Rebecca hadn't seen directed toward herself in years. The realization settled like stone in her stomach, alongside the growing suspicion that her worsening symptoms coincided with Xavier's increased concern about her medication management. As March progressed, Xavier's attention fractured between obligations. His sermons suffered from distraction. Church administrative tasks fell behind schedule. Rebecca received perfunctory attention. His children saw him primarily during Sunday services. Meanwhile, Elliot found herself competing for the privileged position she'd carefully cultivated, watching Xavier's focus drift toward the worship leader during meetings she'd once dominated. The situation reached critical mass during the Easter preparation week. Elliot arrived early for her babysitting shift, letting herself in with the key Xavier had given her for emergencies. The house stood quiet, Rebecca at her sister's for the afternoon. Hearing voices from Xavier's study, Elliot approached silently, expecting to find him on a phone call. Instead, through the partially open door, she witnessed Xavier and Zara standing unnecessarily close over sheet music, his hand occasionally brushing hers. Their conversation punctuated by shared laughter and lingering eye contact. The intimate familiarity of their interaction struck Elliot with sickening recognition, the same pattern Xavier had established with her months earlier. The spiritual mentorship narrative, the professional justification for private meetings, the gradual dissolution of appropriate boundaries. History repeating with sickening precision. Instead of confronting them, Elliot retreated silently, mind calculating adjustments to her strategy. That evening, after the children were asleep, she deliberately left her Harvard acceptance letter visible on the kitchen counter while preparing tea. When Xavier discovered it, his congratulations seemed genuine, though distracted. Harvard's expensive, Elliot mentioned casually. Mom's second job helps, but the scholarship only covers tuition. Living expenses in Cambridge are impossible. Xavier's response came as expected. Vague assurances about finding ways to help deserving students. The transaction remained unspoken but understood. Elliot's silence and continued availability in exchange for financial support. By evening's end, Xavier had promised to explore options through the church's educational fund. His guilt over his waning interest manifesting as financial generosity. April arrived with unexpected consequences. Elliot's missed period initially registered as stress, then as terrifying possibility. The home pregnancy test, taken in a gas station bathroom miles from her neighborhood, confirmed her fears. The timing couldn't have been worse. Xavier's attention now firmly focused on Zara, their worship planning sessions extending well beyond necessary hours. For 3 days, Elliot carried her secret while observing Xavier's behavioral patterns. His interactions with Zara mirrored exactly how he'd pursued Elliot months earlier. The same spiritual language, the same boundary testing, the same gradual isolation from others. Watching this cycle repeat awakened something dangerous in Elliot. Not just jealousy, but vindictive determination. The pregnancy offered leverage she hadn't anticipated. Though abortion briefly entered her calculations, the potential strategic advantage of carrying Xavier's child outweighed other considerations. A pastor's illegitimate child with the teenage babysitter. The scandal alone would guarantee financial security, properly handled. Meanwhile, Rebecca's condition deteriorated further. Increased dosages brought minimal relief but maximum cognitive impact. During rare lucid moments, she began cataloging inconsistencies. Pills that looked different than previous prescriptions, Xavier's insistence on managing her medication schedule, symptoms that intensified after he prepared her evening tea. These observations remained fragmented, however, dissolving under medication's heavy influence before forming coherent suspicion. The Palm Sunday service showcased the shifting dynamics with painful clarity. Zara's worship leadership received Xavier's effusive public praise. Elliot, seated with the Matthews children while Rebecca struggled through her choir director duties, watched Xavier's gaze follow Zara's every movement. The intimate knowledge of his patterns made Zara's danger and her own disposability starkly apparent. By early May, Elliot could no longer button her uniform skirt. Morning sickness arrived with vicious reliability. Her mother attributed both to pre-college stress. Only Elliot recognized the symptoms for what they were. Evidence of Xavier's betrayal growing inside her. Biological documentation she hadn't planned but could certainly utilize. The evening she decided to tell Xavier began like many others. Rebecca medicated upstairs, children completing homework under Elliot's supervision. Xavier sequestered in his study, allegedly preparing Sunday's sermon. After ensuring the children were absorbed in an educational program, Elliot approached the study door, pregnancy test concealed in her pocket. The voices from within stopped her hand mid-knock. Xavier and Zara, their conversation intimate in tone if not in content. Pressing her ear against the door, Elliot heard Xavier using identical phrases he'd once whispered to her. About special connection, about spiritual alignment, about divine purpose in their meeting. The familiar spiritual manipulation now directed toward a new target left Elliot cold with fury. Instead of interrupting, she retreated silently to the kitchen and activated her phone's recording application. Returning to the study door, she captured several minutes of their conversation, including Xavier's invitation for Zara to join him on the upcoming youth ministry retreat. The same strategy he'd used to create overnight opportunities with Elliot months earlier. When Zara finally left through the back door, avoiding the main entrance where the children might see her, Elliot waited 30 calculated minutes before approaching Xavier's study. His distracted greeting barely acknowledged her presence until she placed the positive pregnancy test on his theological reference books. Xavier's expression transformed from confusion to comprehension to calculated assessment in seconds. The man who spoke so eloquently every Sunday found himself momentarily speechless, eyes darting between Elliot's face and the plastic evidence of their transgressions. "This complicates things," he finally managed, voice carefully controlled. "For both of us," Elliot agreed, her hand still resting possessively on the test. "I'll need support. Harvard doesn't provide childcare." Xavier's expression hardened with recognition of the implicit demand. "We need to discuss options." This isn't the right time or situation for your child. Elliot finished, her voice barely above a whisper. The baby that God created through our special connection. The divine purpose you described. The calculated use of his own manipulative language silenced whatever response Xavier had prepared. His expression shifted into something colder, more calculating than Elliot had witnessed before. For the first time, she glimpsed the true nature beneath the charismatic pastoral persona. A man capable of extraordinary compartmentalization and moral flexibility. "We'll address this," Xavier finally responded, glancing toward the hallway where his children's voices echoed from the living room. "Not now. Tomorrow. The prayer garden behind the church. Early, before staff arrives." Elliot nodded, retrieving the test and returning it to her pocket. As she turned to leave, Xavier grabbed her wrist with unexpected force. "This stays between us," he hissed. All pretense of spiritual mentorship evaporated. "Completely between us." The naked fear and aggression in his eyes should have frightened her. Instead, it confirmed what Elliot had suspected. Xavier would protect his reputation at any cost. This certainty hardened her resolve as she prepared for their meeting, carefully positioning her phone to record whatever solution he proposed. Across town, Detective Mercer examined pharmaceutical inventory records showing patterns of specific medications disappearing from multiple sources. The same prescriptions Rebecca Matthews took for her increasingly debilitating condition. The connection forming in Mercer's mind remained tentative but troubling, especially as she recalled Xavier Matthews' careful attention to his wife's medication schedule after Sunday services. In the Matthews home that night, Xavier paced his study until dawn, moving between rage, calculation, and momentary consideration of genuine responsibility. By morning, he had crafted a solution that would protect his reputation, silence Elliot, and free him to pursue Zara, all while maintaining the perfect pastoral image his position required. What Xavier couldn't anticipate. Elliot arriving at the prayer garden early, concealing herself behind ornamental shrubbery with perfect sight line to the bench where Xavier waited. She watched with growing fury as Zara approached instead, responding to a text Xavier had sent after their meeting. From her hidden position, Elliot recorded their entire intimate encounter, capturing irrefutable evidence of Xavier's betrayal of both women. The confrontation would come later that day, but with terms dramatically different than Xavier had planned, setting in motion consequences that would ultimately leave him dead in his study 3 months later. The prayer garden behind Oakwood Community Church stood empty in early morning light as Xavier Matthews waited on the stone bench. His normally confident posture had collapsed into tense vigilance, eyes constantly scanning for unwanted observers. When Elliot emerged from behind the rose trellis rather than the main path, his momentary confusion transformed into wary calculation. "You're early," he observed, voice stripped of its usual warmth. Elliot's response came not in words but in action, holding up her phone, screen displaying the previous evening's recording. Xavier's intimate conversation with Zara played at low volume, his identical promises of spiritual connection, divine purpose, and special understanding echoing between them in the empty garden. The transformation that overtook Xavier's features revealed what lived beneath his carefully cultivated persona. The compassionate spiritual leader vanished, replaced by cold fury. His hand shot out, attempting to snatch the phone, but Elliot anticipated the move, stepping backward while continuing the recording. "There's more," she informed him, voice steady despite the dangerous shift in his demeanor. "Much more. From the past 3 months. Backed up to secure cloud storage." Xavier's professional training reasserted itself, forcing measured breathing, composing his features into practiced neutrality. "What exactly do you want, Elliot?" "Financial security for your child. 4 years at Harvard fully funded. A suitable apartment near campus. Medical coverage. Monthly support payments. Extortion is a criminal offense," Xavier noted, voice dangerously soft. "So is statutory rape of a minor in your pastoral care," Elliot countered without hesitation. Her hand moved protectively to her abdomen. "I'm keeping this baby." Something dangerous flashed in Xavier's eyes, a glimpse of capacity for violence that his congregation would never recognize. That choice has consequences beyond money, Elliot. Your reputation, your family's standing in the community, your academic future. Consider carefully what happens when the church board hears about the troubled teenager who obsessively pursued her pastor, fabricated evidence, made delusional claims. The threat hung between them, his expression subtly transforming into something predatory. Who do you think they'll believe? The respected spiritual leader or the manipulative teenager with documented emotional problems? Elliot's carefully maintained composure wavered momentarily. Emotional problems? Xavier's smile carried no warmth. Your sealed juvenile record for that unfortunate incident at your previous school. The one involving fabricated claims against a teacher. The psychiatric evaluation. The recommended medication you stopped taking. The blood drained from Elliot's face. Her juvenile record had been sealed by court order, accessible only through connections she hadn't anticipated Xavier possessing. Church board member Judge Henderson was quite concerned when I consulted him confidentially about a troubled young person in our congregation. Xavier continued, advantage shifting perceptibly. Stalking behaviors, false accusations, inappropriate fixations on authority figures. A concerning pattern. Elliot's careful plans teetered on collapse as Xavier rose from the bench, stepping closer with renewed confidence. The church can provide counseling, discreet medical care, a fresh start elsewhere. Or you can pursue this ill-advised course and discover exactly how completely I can dismantle your future. His hand grasped her upper arm with painful intensity. Choose wisely, Elliot. The moment suspended between them, Xavier's calculated threat against Elliot's desperate leverage, shattered with the unexpected appearance of Zara Whitfield entering the prayer garden. She stopped abruptly, taking in the tableau before her. Xavier gripping Elliot's arm, the teenager's face pale with distress, the unmistakable tension between them. I got your text asking to meet here, Zara said slowly, eyes narrowing at Xavier's hand still gripping Elliot's arm. Is everything okay? Xavier released Elliot immediately, pastoral mask sliding seamlessly back into place. Elliot was just leaving. We were discussing her college scholarship options. At 6:30 in the morning? With your hand on her arm like that? Zara's question carried quiet authority that belied her youth. Before Xavier could respond, Elliot made a decision that would alter everything. I'm pregnant, she stated flatly, with his child, and he wants me to take care of it, so he can pursue you instead. The color drained from Xavier's face as his worlds collided catastrophically. His eyes fixed on Zara, searching her expression for salvageable connection. What he saw, disgust, disappointment, recognition, triggered something primal in his carefully compartmentalized psyche. In that moment, preservation of his relationship with Zara superseded all other considerations. Reputation, position, even freedom. Zara, please. He stepped toward her, ignoring Elliot completely. This isn't what it appears. Elliot has been unstable, fixated on me inappropriately. The pregnancy claim is manipulation. Stop talking, Xavier. Zara's voice cut through his desperate rationalization. She turned to Elliot, extending her hand. Are you all right? Did he hurt you? Xavier watched in mute horror as the connection he'd cultivated with Zara transferred instantly to protective concern for Elliot. His carefully constructed narrative collapsed beneath the weight of physical evidence and his own documented patterns. She's lying, he attempted desperately. Her record shows pattern of false accusations against authority figures. Please, Zara, our connection is different. Special. I've heard enough. Zara turned away, her posture communicating complete dismissal. Xavier's expression transformed, desperation replacing calculation. His hand extended toward Zara, attempting to recapture her attention, her connection. We need to talk privately. What we have transcends this misunderstanding. There is no we, Xavier. Zara's response carried absolute finality. As she walked away, Xavier stood frozen, watching his carefully constructed future disintegrate. Something within him shifted irrevocably, obsession crystallizing where manipulation had previously sufficed. His gaze followed Zara with unsettling intensity, mentally cataloging her schedule, her habits, her vulnerabilities. The loss of control triggered dangerous recalibration in Xavier's fragmented psyche, rejection transforming attraction into possessive fixation. Elliot observed this transformation with analytical precision, recognizing the dangerous shift occurring within Xavier. His complete dismissal of her presence, his laser focus on Zara's retreating form, revealed the depth of his obsession with the worship leader. What Elliot hadn't anticipated, the corresponding possessive fixation developing within herself. The months of strategic pursuit had transformed calculation into genuine attachment, financial motivation into emotional dependency. As Xavier finally turned back toward her, Elliot recognized something familiar in his expression. The same obsessive intensity she felt toward him now reflected in his fixation on Zara. Their gazes locked in momentary recognition of parallel pathology. "This changes nothing about our arrangement," Xavier stated flatly, professional mask temporarily abandoned. "You'll terminate this pregnancy, sign confidentiality agreements, and accept reasonable financial support for your education. Otherwise, I'll ensure your history becomes public knowledge, destroying your Harvard prospects permanently." Elliot's hand remained protectively over her abdomen, her initial strategic leverage now complicated by unexpected emotional attachment to both Xavier and their unborn child. "I'm keeping this baby," she repeated, voice steadier than her racing pulse. "And I expect appropriate support." Xavier's expression hardened into something unfamiliar, the calculating pastor replaced by dangerous obsession. "Then you've made your choice," he stated coldly before turning away, his attention already redirected toward planning his next interaction with Zara. In the days that followed, Xavier's behavior shifted perceptibly. His sermons grew erratic, attention wandering mid-scripture. Church administrative duties received perfunctory attention. Meanwhile, his preoccupation with Zara intensified beyond professional boundaries into concerning surveillance. He rearranged committee meetings to align with her worship rehearsals. His vehicle appeared with increasing frequency near her apartment complex. Late-night text messages accumulated on her phone, each message demonstrating deteriorating boundaries and escalating emotional demands. Rebecca noticed these changes despite her medication-induced fog. Xavier's increased dosing of her prescriptions kept her disoriented enough to maintain control, but not completely oblivious to his growing obsession with the worship leader. During rare moments of clarity, she observed his distracted demeanor, his fixation on Zara during services, his transparent manipulations to create interaction opportunities. These observations remained fragmented, however, dissolving under medication's influence before forming coherent suspicion. Meanwhile, Elliot developed her own parallel obsession. What began as calculated financial security transformed into desperate emotional attachment. Her bedroom walls gradually accumulated photographs of Xavier, images captured during surveillance outside the church, the parsonage, the locations where he followed Zara. Each picture meticulously dated, organized chronologically, creating visual documentation of her fading importance in his life as his attention transferred completely to Zara. The Harvard acceptance packet gathered dust beneath surveillance equipment purchased with funds extracted from church accounts using passwords obtained during intimate encounters in Xavier's study. Academic ambition receded beneath growing fixation on Xavier's movements, his deteriorating stability, his escalating pursuit of Zara. Elliot's morning sickness provided convenient explanation for school absences spent instead tracking Xavier's increasingly erratic behavior. Her mother attributed personality changes to pregnancy hormones rather than dangerous obsession. The financial cushion Xavier had provided during their relationship facilitated this surveillance, car payments, technology upgrades, flexible spending justified as academic support from the church. The situation reached critical mass when Rebecca collapsed during the women's ministry luncheon, her system finally overwhelmed by Xavier's medication tampering. The resulting hospitalization created unwelcome scrutiny from medical professionals recognizing inconsistencies in her prescription regimen. Though Rebecca remained largely unaware, physicians identified concerning combinations explaining her chronic symptoms, medication interactions specifically designed to create disorientation and dependency. Xavier's attention barely registered his wife's hospitalization, his focus consumed instead by Zara's continued rejection. Each unanswered message, each rebuffed approach, each professional boundary reinforced intensified his desperate fixation. The worship leader's complete withdrawal following Elliot's revelation transformed Xavier's initial attraction into dangerous obsession, her absence reinterpreted as orchestrated separation requiring intervention rather than respected choice. Across town, Elliot meticulously documented Xavier's deterioration, her initial financial motivation now secondary to vindictive determination. Every manifestation of his obsession with Zara fed Elliot's parallel fixation on him. Each photographed interaction, each recorded message, each boundary violation strengthening her resolve to recapture his attention through any means necessary. By late June, these dangerous obsessions converged toward inevitable confrontation. Xavier's carefully constructed world showed fracture lines extending in multiple directions, professional facade crumbling beneath twin pressures of Zara's rejection and Elliot's pregnancy. His once compartmentalized life collapsed into single-minded focus on reclaiming connection with Zara, increasingly convinced their spiritual alignment transcended conventional boundaries, including consent. Elliot's pregnancy advanced alongside her fixation, strategic leverage evolving into emotional weapon. Each sonogram image, each physical manifestation of their relationship, carefully documented and preserved as evidence of connection Xavier desperately tried erasing. Her surveillance expanded beyond Xavier to include Zara, monitoring the worship leader's movements, understanding her routines, analyzing Xavier's pursuit patterns. These parallel obsessions accelerated toward collision course, neither Xavier nor Elliot recognizing the dangerous symmetry in their deteriorating stability. Twin fixations propelling them toward confrontation that would ultimately leave one dead, one imprisoned, and multiple lives shattered beyond recognition. The last days of June brought oppressive humidity to Jacksonville, matching the suffocating atmosphere developing around Oakwood Community Church. Xavier Matthews' carefully compartmentalized existence continued disintegrating, external facades crumbling against internal obsession. His fixation on Zara Whitfield consumed every waking thought, pastoral duties executed through muscle memory, while his mind calculated opportunities for reconnection, surveillance, possession. Rebecca Matthews' hospital discharge created unexpected complications. The attending physician's decision to adjust her medication regimen, eliminating questionable prescriptions, recalibrating dosages, had triggered unfamiliar clarity. Fragmented observations previously dissolved by chemical fog began assembling into coherent suspicion. Xavier's attentiveness to her medication schedule, the subtle differences in pill appearance, the correlation between increased symptoms and his growing interest in Zara. These realizations crystallized into horrifying comprehension during a conversation with Elliot Chambers. The teenager arrived at Rebecca's hospital room during Xavier's conspicuously brief daily visit to the church office. Her purpose initially seemed professional, delivering homework completed by the Matthews children during her continued babysitting duties. The moment Xavier's footsteps faded down the corridor, however, Elliot's demeanor transformed completely. "He's been tampering with your medication?" she stated without preamble, voice flat with suppressed emotion, replacing prescriptions with combinations designed to create confusion, disorientation, dependency. Rebecca's initial reaction reflected months of pharmaceutical manipulation, disbelief, denial, rationalization. Elliot anticipated these responses, producing her phone with methodical precision. The recordings she shared demolished Rebecca's remaining illusions, Xavier discussing medication adjustments to keep Rebecca manageable. Xavier describing intimate encounters with Elliot in the master bedroom during Rebecca's sedated sleep. Xavier repeatedly using identical seduction techniques with both Elliot and Zara. Each woman told they represented divine connection and spiritual alignment. The evidence accumulated beyond possibility of misinterpretation, beyond hope of innocent explanation. Rebecca's physician confirmed pharmaceutical analysis matching Elliot's claims. Prescription bottles containing medications never ordered, combinations specifically creating Rebecca's documented symptoms. What Elliot didn't reveal during this initial confession: her own deteriorating stability. The pregnancy, originally leveraged for financial security, had transformed strategic manipulation into dangerous emotional attachment. Her surveillance of Xavier now consumed every unscheduled hour, academic ambitions abandoned beneath obsessive documentation of his movements, his behaviors, his escalating pursuit of Zara. The Harvard acceptance gathering dust while her bedroom walls accumulated photographs, timelines, transcribed conversations, shrine to psychological unraveling disguised as evidence collection. The alliance forming between Rebecca and Elliot expanded unexpectedly when Zara Whitfield arrived at the hospital room the following day. The worship leader's professional distance had dissolved after witnessing Xavier's interaction with Elliot in the prayer garden, protective instincts activated by recognition of predatory pattern. Her previous experience with boundary violations by ministry leaders created immediate recognition of Xavier's manipulation techniques. "He's escalating," Zara informed them quietly, placing her phone on the hospital tray table. "These messages arrived yesterday. 27 texts between midnight and 5 a.m. Voice messages describing divine visions about our future together. Then this morning, I found him waiting beside my car at the gym." The messages displayed increasing detachment from reality. Xavier describing spiritual revelations, divine confirmation, transcendent connection. The language grew simultaneously more grandiose and more intimate, boundaries dissolving between professional ministry and personal obsession. Most concerning, references to eliminating interference and removing obstacles to divine purpose. Rebecca's expression remained composed as she absorbed this evidence. Years of pastor's wife training maintaining external calm despite internal devastation. "He's been following similar patterns with all three of us," she observed, "creating isolation, manufacturing spiritual justification, establishing control through manipulation." What Rebecca couldn't articulate. The deepening suspicion that Xavier's behavior represented not newfound pathology but revealed character. Patterns likely established long before their marriage, temporarily contained beneath pastoral performance but never truly eliminated. Zara noted the prescription bottles lined on Rebecca's nightstand, remembering similar medication recommended during her own experience with an abusive church leader in Atlanta. "The same controlling techniques," she observed quietly. "Different targets, identical methods." The recognition of shared experience created unexpected solidarity among the three women, the wife, the babysitter, the worship leader, each manipulated through calculated exploitation of vulnerability. Individual betrayal transformed into collective determination as they compared documentation, shared observations, recognized escalating danger in Xavier's deteriorating stability. "He's becoming unpredictable," Rebecca noted, scrolling through recent text exchanges from deacons expressing concern about Xavier's erratic sermon delivery, missed appointments, inappropriate comments during counseling sessions. "The medication management kept me disoriented enough to maintain his control. Without that," the implication hung unspoken, Xavier's loss of control potentially triggering dangerous escalation. Rebecca's impending hospital discharge threatened his carefully maintained narrative, introducing unpredictable variables into increasingly unstable equilibrium. Meanwhile, Xavier's obsession with Zara intensified beyond rational boundaries. Church administrative duties remained unaddressed while he restructured his schedule around her movements, arriving at her favorite coffee shop before her morning music lessons, positioning himself near the community college where she taught afternoon classes, parking outside her apartment complex during evening hours. Each rebuffed approach, each unanswered message, each professional boundary reinforced transformed fixation into dangerous preoccupation. The worship leader's continued rejection represented incomprehensible obstacle rather than respected choice. In Xavier's increasingly distorted perception, external forces must be manipulating Zara's decisions. Rebecca's interference, Elliot's jealousy, church leadership's misunderstanding. These rationalizations protected his fragile self-concept while justifying escalating pursuit behaviors. Elliot observed these developments with obsessive documentation, her initial financial motivation completely subsumed beneath emotional fixation. Each manifestation of Xavier's pursuit of Zara intensified Elliot's parallel obsession. Surveillance photographs accumulating, journal entries expanding, recording equipment constantly upgraded. The pregnancy advancing beneath loose clothing provided both tangible connection to Xavier and implicit reminder of his betrayal. The psychological warfare began subtly. Rebecca suggesting specific vitamin supplements to support Xavier during this stressful period. The capsules, identical in appearance to his regular regimen, contained carefully calibrated combinations producing effects mirroring those Xavier had inflicted on Rebecca for months. Mild disorientation, emotional volatility, occasional paranoia, physical symptoms difficult to distinguish from stress reactions. By mid-July, the effects became increasingly apparent. Xavier's sermon delivery grew erratic, tangential references, inappropriate emotional displays, occasional disorientation mid-scripture. Church board members expressed growing concern about his mental state, suggesting compassionate leave following Rebecca's hospitalization and Elliot's now visible pregnancy, generating congregation speculation. Xavier attributed these symptoms to spiritual warfare, external persecution, divine testing, narratives reinforcing messianic self-perception while justifying increasingly extreme behaviors. The medication effects intensified paranoid tendencies already developing through obsessive fixation, creating dangerous combination of emotional volatility and distorted reasoning. Zara's firm rejection during a chance encounter at the church office triggered catastrophic escalation. Her carefully professional boundaries, maintaining physical distance, witnessing present, documentation of conversation, registered as personal betrayal in Xavier's deteriorating perception. Our connection transcends professional boundaries, he insisted, voice fluctuating between pastoral authority and desperate pleading. The divine purpose revealed requires courage to transcend conventional limitations. There is no connection beyond professional collaboration, Zara responded with deliberate clarity. Any perception otherwise represents inappropriate projection rather than spiritual revelation. The rejection shattered Xavier's remaining restraint. Within hours, his escalation manifested in physical surveillance. Vehicle parked directly outside her apartment rather than discreetly positioned nearby. Text messages transformed from spiritual justification to explicit emotional demands. Professional pretense abandoned beneath raw obsession. The breaking point arrived during Sunday morning service in late July. Xavier's sermon, ostensibly addressing biblical faithfulness, deteriorated into thinly disguised commentary on personal betrayal, divine retribution, and spiritual warfare against those interfering with sacred purpose. His gestures grew increasingly erratic, voice modulation unpredictable, scripture references abandoned mid-citation. From the front pew, Rebecca observed these manifestations with clinical detachment, recognizing combined effects of medication adjustment and psychological deterioration. From the sound booth, Zara documented concerning behavioral indicators while maintaining professional composure. From the nursery, Elliot watched via closed-circuit feed, satisfaction at Xavier's unraveling complicated by persistent emotional attachment. The congregation's stunned reaction registered as conspiracy in Xavier's distorted perception. During closing prayer, his improvised petition included disturbing references to purification through divine fire and elimination of those opposing spiritual alignment. Concerned deacons exchanged glances while youth pastors discreetly positioned themselves between Xavier and the congregation. Following dismissal, Xavier discovered unfamiliar medication capsules among his supplements, identical in appearance to his regular vitamins but distinctive in subtle coloration. The realization of deliberate tampering crystallized paranoid suspicions already developing through psychological deterioration. Rebecca's improved clarity, Zara's continued rejection, Elliot's visible pregnancy. Previously disconnected threats converged into perceived coordinated attack. Xavier returned to the parsonage ahead of Rebecca's church social obligations, movement driven by dangerous combination of paranoid perception and genuine grievance. The study door slammed with uncharacteristic violence as he methodically arranged evidence of medication tampering alongside documentation of perceived conspiracy. Rebecca's pharmaceutical knowledge, Zara's rejection timeline, Elliot's financial demands. Rebecca entered the parsonage 2 hours later, immediately registering the ominous silence. Xavier's vehicle in the driveway. Study light illuminating hallway. Children safely at Sunday evening youth activities. The calculated risk of returning alone represented necessary confrontation rather than reckless endangerment. Xavier's deteriorating stability requiring immediate intervention before potential escalation toward Zara or Elliot. The study door opened before Rebecca's knock completed, revealing Xavier's transformed appearance, disheveled clothing, unshaven face, eyes reflecting dangerous combination of righteous indignation and pharmaceutical disorientation. "You've been tampering with my medication," he stated, voice unnaturally controlled despite physical manifestations of extreme agitation. "Conspiring with your accomplices to manipulate my perceptions, interfere with divine purpose, destroy sacred connection." Rebecca maintained deliberate distance while activating recording application on her phone. Documentation rather than protection her primary consideration. "The same medications you've been giving me for months," she responded evenly, "causing identical symptoms to those you're experiencing." Xavier's expression registered momentary confusion before darkening into dangerous comprehension. "You've allied yourself with them against me," he concluded, perception filtered through paranoid distortion. "Against divine purpose, against spiritual revelation." "I've allied myself with other victims of your manipulation," Rebecca corrected, maintaining measured tone despite escalating danger. "Your medication tampering, your spiritual exploitation, your predatory pattern extending beyond our marriage to include vulnerable young women in your pastoral care." The accusation's precision penetrated Xavier's pharmaceutical haze, triggering dangerous recalibration from righteous indignation to cornered calculation. His gaze shifted toward the study door, mental assessment of physical advantage combining with growing comprehension of legal jeopardy. "You have no proof," he attempted, pastoral manipulation reflexively engaging despite deteriorating circumstances. "Your medication affects your perception. Your jealousy distorts reality. We have extensive documentation," Rebecca interrupted calmly. "Pharmaceutical analysis, financial records, recorded conversations, witness testimony from multiple victims." Xavier's expression transformed from calculation to dangerous instability, cornered predator recognizing inescapable containment. His movement toward Rebecca carried unmistakable threat, control abandoned beneath primitive self-preservation. "You've destroyed everything," he stated with chilling finality, hands clenching with barely restrained violence. "My ministry, my reputation, my divine purpose with Zara." Rebecca maintained measured distance, recognition of imminent danger balanced against necessity of documented confession. "You destroyed those things yourself, Xavier, through deliberate choices, through calculated manipulation, through betrayal of every principle you claimed to represent." The confrontation balanced on dangerous precipice, Xavier's deteriorating restraint against Rebecca's strategic documentation. Neither recognized the third presence now witnessing their exchange from the hallway shadows, obsessive surveillance having brought Elliot Chambers to the parsonage at precisely this volatile moment. The first days of August brought suffocating heat to Jacksonville, mirroring Xavier Matthews' psychological disintegration. The confrontation with Rebecca catalyzed complete collapse of his remaining stability. Paranoid delusions crystallized around perceived conspiracy. Rebecca, Zara, and Elliot transformed in his distorted perception from individual betrayers into coordinated opposition against divine purpose. His removal from pastoral duties following the Sunday service breakdown registered not as consequence of erratic behavior but as spiritual persecution. Church leadership's compassionate leave recommendation, delivered by concerned deacons witnessing increasingly troubling conduct, reinforced Xavier's persecution narrative. Each manifestation of concern filtered through paranoid interpretation, evidence of manipulation rather than legitimate apprehension. The mandatory psychiatric evaluation condition attached to potential reinstatement became final confirmation of widespread conspiracy. Zara Whitfield's terrifying encounter occurred during pre-dawn hours 3 days after Xavier's confrontation with Rebecca. The worship leader woke to inexplicable sound within her apartment, discovering Xavier standing in her bedroom doorway, expression reflecting dangerous combination of messianic conviction and pharmaceutical disorientation. "Our divine purpose requires immediate unification," he informed her with unnerving calm, explaining his entry through bathroom window as necessary intervention against those manipulating your perception. The worship leader's strategic response, engaging conversation while activating emergency alert through smartwatch, resulted in law enforcement intervention before physical escalation. The restraining orders filed immediately afterward prohibited Xavier's approach within 500 feet of Rebecca, Elliot, or Zara. These legal boundaries represented inconvenience rather than deterrent to Xavier's deteriorating reasoning. His surveillance intensified despite restrictions, tracking devices discovered beneath all three women's vehicles, wireless cameras identified in Zara's apartment ventilation system, monitoring software detected on Rebecca's devices. Detective Mercer's investigation accelerated following Zara's break-in incident, pharmaceutical fraud evidence connecting to emerging domestic abuse pattern. The prescription bottles recovered from the Matthews residence contained expert modifications matching pharmacy theft methodology. Xavier's knowledge from previous hospital chaplaincy explaining technical sophistication beyond average capability. Meanwhile, Xavier's manifesto developed across 17 handwritten journals discovered later in his vehicle trunk. The contents revealed progressive detachment from reality, elaborate justifications for purification ritual, addressing corruption within sacred purpose. The documents detailed specific plans for each woman, theological rationalizations for violence, burial locations selected across church property with disturbing precision. The ultimatum arrived through unexpected channel. Church secretary receiving hand-delivered envelope containing Xavier's demand that Zara meet him alone at the sanctuary to resolve misunderstandings before irreversible consequences become necessary. The communication included photographs documenting surveillance of all three women despite restraining orders. Implicit threat requiring no clarification. After consultation with Detective Mercer, strategic response developed, Zara agreeing to meeting with comprehensive surveillance support, law enforcement positioned throughout church campus, recording equipment documenting encounter. The calculated risk balanced against Xavier's escalating instability, potentially directing violence toward multiple targets without intervention opportunity. The fatal encounter occurred precisely as scheduled, Xavier arriving through rarely used maintenance entrance, circumventing visible security measures with institutional knowledge from years of pastoral access. His appearance reflected complete psychological deterioration. Disheveled clothing, unshaven face, eyes revealing dangerous combination of messianic conviction and pharmaceutical disorientation. The conspiracy has been revealed, he informed Zara upon entering the sanctuary. Movement erratic yet purposeful. Your manipulation by external forces requires intervention before irreversible corruption. His peripheral awareness registered unusual reflection from choir loft ventilation grate, recognition of surveillance triggering catastrophic escalation. The ceremonial cross, normally secured to sanctuary wall, had been removed for cleaning, creating unexpected weapon opportunity as Xavier's fragmented reasoning perceived immediate threat requiring elimination. The violent lunge toward Zara coincided with Elliot's unexpected emergence from side chapel, the teenager's obsessive surveillance having revealed operation details despite deliberate exclusion from planning. Her intervention trajectory intersected Xavier's attack vector, creating momentary diversion allowing Zara's defensive response, instinctive redirection of momentum rather than calculated counterattack. The ceremonial cross placement represented tragic coincidence. Positioned against communion table during cleaning process, ornate base creating impalement hazard unrecognized during confrontation dynamics. Xavier's redirected momentum carried him onto decorative finial with catastrophic force, penetrating thoracic cavity with unsurvivable consequences. Elliot's desperate 911 call reflected genuine anguish rather than calculated performance. Strategic manipulation transformed through months of obsessive attachment into genuine emotional dependency despite Xavier's betrayal. Her documented response, attempts at hemorrhage control, desperate bargaining audible on dispatch recording, protection of unborn child during physical exertion, supported subsequent self-defense determination despite complex motivational factors. Detective Mercer's arrival preceded emergency medical response. The investigator's vehicle positioned closer to church campus than dispatched ambulance. Her documentation of crime scene proceeded with methodical precision despite chaotic circumstances. Xavier's manifestos discovered in vehicle search, providing crucial context for psychological deterioration preceding fatal confrontation. The toxicology screening confirmed extensive pharmaceutical presence matching substances previously administered to Rebecca, evidence supporting medication tampering narrative while contextualizing psychological deterioration within chemical influence rather than solely character pathology. This determination proved crucial during subsequent investigation, providing framework for understanding progressive detachment from reality leading to violent culmination. Church community reaction reflected predictable fragmentation. Congregational response divided between support for victims and defensive denial protecting institutional reputation. Long-standing members struggled reconciling beloved pastoral image with documented predatory behavior, psychological manipulation, pharmaceutical tampering. Newer attendees demonstrated greater acceptance of evidence, particularly younger demographics recognizing abuse patterns from contemporary awareness. The case resolution reflected investigative thoroughness rather than expedient closure. Detective Mercer's comprehensive documentation establishing clear self-defense determination despite complex circumstances. The evidence assembly connected pharmaceutical theft pattern, medication tampering methodology, financial irregularities, psychological manipulation history, and documented escalation preceding fatal confrontation. 3 months after Xavier's death, interconnected lives continued painful reconstruction, Rebecca gradually recovering physical health while navigating congregation leadership transition, Elliot delivering healthy daughter while rebuilding academic trajectory, Zara developing support network for survivors of spiritual authority abuse while processing traumatic experience. The case's final evidence emerged during parsonage renovation. Contractor discovering hidden compartment beneath study floorboards containing comprehensive surveillance documentation extending years before Elliot or Zara entered Xavier's sphere. The materials revealed long-established pattern rather than recent deterioration, targeting vulnerability through calculated methodology refined across multiple victims previously unidentified during investigation. Detective Mercer's case closure coincided with autumn's arrival. Fallen leaves covering church grounds including precisely mapped burial locations detailed in Xavier's manifesto. Sites never utilized yet methodically prepared across years of ostensible spiritual leadership. The investigators' final documentation included audio extraction from Xavier's last completed sermon, delivered days before fatal confrontation, containing unintentionally prophetic declaration. Judgment arrives unexpectedly, revealing true nature previously concealed beneath careful presentation. Darkness exposed through divine timing rather than human scheduling. Consequences manifesting through unexpected instruments rather than anticipated mechanisms. The recording's unintentional accuracy provided fitting epitaph to case built upon deception, manipulation, obsession, truth eventually emerging through unexpected channels despite elaborate concealment. The 3 survivors moved forward carrying different wounds from identical source, their unexpected alliance forged through shared betrayal creating foundation for healing beyond individual capacity.